Hey guys, Jason here, back with part 3 of my OCG Retrospective. In the last video, I covered the first stage of the game's evolution, ironic because the shift was away from evolutions and towards big basics like Bolmedius, Cursed Totem, and Petrova. Aside from this, the Invincible block was memorable in exposing us to some of the most powerful cards the game had ever seen, like the Slash cards, Aquan, and Skeleton Vise, all of which are banned in the OCG today. This next block of sets, the Eternal block, gave us multi-civ cards, the most infamous of which being Bombazar Dragon of Destiny. Bombazar decks unsurprisingly rose to prominence very quickly, but Aquan and friends would not go down without a fight. As per usual, I need to disclose that I did not come up with these lists myself. They were taken from the Japanese YouTuber Sasabo, links in the description. Sasabo has done retrospective and gameplay videos for the first few sets, which even spanned the English releases. He also live streams Duel Masters plays, which Andrew gets ideas from, so check out his channel if you have a moment. The first deck I'm highlighting is a classic Bombazar blue list similar to those that took over the West. For multi-civ, we have 4 copies of Bombazar, speed attacker, double breaker, take an extra turn, you lose after that, but you don't play him unless you're expecting to win. 4 copies because we want to see him at all times. The other multi-civ cards are just a pair of Windax for blocker hate, which Bombazar appreciates. For fire, 4 Apocalypse Vise and 2 Twin Cannons. Twin Cannon is your backup attacker who you want to summon on your second Bombazar turn. One of Bombazar's effects that tends to get overlooked is when summoned he kills creatures with power 6k. Since he himself is 6k, it doesn't make sense to Bombazar into Bombazar, so that is why Twin Cannon is the wyvern for the job. 4 Apocalypse Vise is curious, and this is the first time I'm seeing a list with 4. To me, 4 is excessive, but I suppose when you consider it can act as both board clear and spot removal, it's a little easier to justify. That and a single Vise can clear 2 Tajamals. Moving on to nature, we have a 3 Poisonous Mushroom, 4 Essence Elf, 4 Bronze Arm, who curves beautifully into Windax by the way, and 4 Soul Swap. The first 3 cards I mentioned are self-explanatory, they just make playing cards easier. Now Soul Swap. As good as Bombazar is, I think Soul Swap made the problem worse than it needed to be. When you activate it, you can chuck one of your creatures into mana, and then pick a creature in mana with a cost equal to or less than the number of cards in your mana zone and summon it. So when you have 6 mana, you can cast it, now you're at 7, bring out Bombazar, and you still have 4 mana to spare. Now think about playing multiple Soul Swap in one turn, or drawing into it and then casting Soul Swap. These are but a few of the shenanigans the deck can pull off. Water is here for the same reason it always is. Draw. 4 Hulkus, 4 Stream, 1 Cyberbrain, and 4 Aqua Surfer. It's very reminiscent of the TCG Bombazar blue decks in that you have lots of cheap draw, and Aqua Surfer is the perfect trig by being a creature and providing unconditional spot removal. Cyberbrain was limited to 1 at this point, so the next best thing they had was Energy Stream. I actually can't believe it took 4 sets for Energy Stream to see play. The deck enjoys a high creature count to help Bombazar's assault and to have plenty of targets for Soul Swap. 39 out of the 40 cards are available in the TCG, so I'm sure you know what to do. For DM10, deck number 2, Aquan is back and he's being paired with Initiates. 4 Sarius, 2 Ballas, and 3 Miel are in for the cheap Evo bait, with the evolutions being 2 Craze Valkyrie and 3 copies of Newcomer Glax Magicula. It's crazy strong given its tiny cost of 2, especially when played alongside Petrova. It's also neat in that it gives you the option to discard 2 cards to prevent a shield from being broken. The remaining light cards are 1 Mysterious, 2 Petrova, and 3 Holy Awe, basically light staples at this point. For water, we've got 4 Aquan and 1 Cyberbrain acting as the draw engine, accompanied by 3 Aqua Surfer. I suppose the new threat of Bombazar really necessitated the use of shield trigger spot removal. I find it curious though that Tajamal wasn't included in this deck because not only is he an initiate, but he also stops Bombazar and Twin Cannon right in their tracks. I can't say for certain, but I'm guessing it might be because Tajamal is seen as Windax food, and even though the same can be said for Sarius, Sarius is still cheaper and doesn't go into mana tapped. For darkness, we have 3 Dark Hydra Evil Planet Lord, a new promo card we never got in the TCG, who I'll talk more about later. The rest of the lineup is made up of 4 Skeleton Vise, 2 Terrapit, 1 Photocide, and 1 Lost Soul. 4 Skeleton Vise is more important than ever because of the need to prevent Bombazar decks from gaining any momentum. 2 Terrapit, it's good, but I think the deck is tight on space. Photocide and Lost Soul are mainly there for Aquan mirrors, but it's worth mentioning, Photocide, when combined with the tap effects, can run over pretty much anything. Dark Hydra is a 6 mana 6k double breaker, and its effect lets you grab a creature from your graveyard when you put a creature of the same race into the battle zone. It's cool in that the effect triggers off any creature, not just other creatures, which means Dark Hydra can be used to recover another copy of himself when he hits the field. The effect seems like a neat way of gaining hand advantage, but can also be very useful for recycling blockers. Right now, I'm not seeing any crazy combos with it, but I have to acknowledge the synergy between Dark Hydra's and Glycemagicula's effects. When bringing things over to the TCG, I drop a few copies of Miel and Ballas for Magris, Aquan and Cyberbrain for Marino and Energy Stream, and Skeleton Vise for Cranium Clamp. Photoside, if not relevant to your meta, can also be dropped for the third Terrapit. Dark Hydra though is an interesting case. If Graveyard Retrieval is what you're after, there are many things that fit the bill like Morbid Medicine, Corpse Charger, and even Zombie Carnival. On the other hand, if lack of Graveyard Retrieval doesn't kill the deck, you could try boosting counts of other cards. Throwing in Slash Chargers to set up a turn 4 Marino or Petrova may also not be such a bad idea. Progressing through the timeline, DM11 is a set famous for introducing Wave Strikers and the Miraculous spells. One of the decks Sasabo shared is another Aquan deck, nearly identical to what we just covered, so I'm going to skip over that. The big talking point for this set is a dedicated deck-out deck that abuses a handful of cards to immobilize the board. Starting off, we have 4 Miraculous Snare. I think this is one of the most criminally underrated cards in the TCG, or maybe it just doesn't get talked about enough because it's so hard to find. It is in my opinion one of, if not the best spot removal card in the game. At a puny cost of 3 mana, pick a non-evolution creature in the battle zone and chuck it in its owner's shields. When you consider that there are more ways to interact with the mana zone or graveyard, a correctly timed snare is a very reliable way of removing problem creatures from the game entirely. Not only that, you can also use it on your own shield trigger creatures as a last line of defense. It works especially well here because we don't even care about how many shields our opponent has, since the objective is to deck them out anyway. This is followed by 4 Belix the Explorer, who has similar stats to Sarius, but fishes a spell out of mana when summoned. This is a way to reuse your Slash Chargers or to pull out a high cost spell charged early in the game. The next set of cards is what forms the core of the deck. 3 Palo-Elysis Morning Guardian, 3 Nariel the Oracle, and 4 Ikaz the Spy Droid. Many of you are probably familiar with Palo-Elysis. It gives your creatures a nice 2k power boost during your opponent's turn. Meanwhile, Nariel's effect prevents any creatures with power 3k or more from attacking. This is all topped off by Ikaz, who, after blocking, allows you to untap one of your creatures, including himself. So, you use Palo-Elysis to power up Ikaz, who can block an infinite amount of times, while Nariel stops anyone who might overpower Ikaz from getting through. Not only that, the Palo-Elysis boost to Nariel also prevents it from getting killed so easily. Sure, it feels like it takes a bit of time to get going, but the stranglehold you can apply makes it worth it. For water, we're of course fueled by a playset of Aquan and a single Cyberbrain, but this is the last time we're going to see a playset of Aquan, as he was restricted to one a short while later. Exploring the rest of the deck, we've got 4 Slash Charger, search your opponent's deck for a card, dump it, then it goes into your mana, very good, 4 Skeleton Vise, 2 Lost Soul, 2 Hell Slash, and 3 Terrapit for a very thick Darkness section. It makes sense though, since many of your hardcasts are going to be discard cards. The remaining slots of the deck are awarded to 4 Burst Shot, which we haven't seen in a while. We have it here to get rid of any opposing creatures that might slip through any holes in our defense. The strategy of the deck is to use your combination of light creatures backed by Miraculous Snare to immobilize your opponent and then chip away at their deck with darkness spells. As at today, Nariel is currently restricted to 1 in the OCG, and my guess is its ability to make games non-interactive is the reason why. I can imagine Recreation in the TCG being better than other Aquan decks because you have the ability to curve Slash Charger, a key part of the deck, into Marinomancer. Then go with the typical swaps, Cyberbrain for a draw spell, Vises for clamps, Hell for feature slash, and you've got a deck on your hands. In saying that, this is one deck I would probably avoid if you value your friendships with other DM players, since I can't imagine this deck being fun to play against. And now we have caught up with the TCG in DM12. Contrary to the English name of the set, it doesn't seem as if the big Vortex evolutions really caught on. The most immediately impactful card was super rare Terra Dragon Archie de la Serna, though Cloned Nightmare would eventually catch on as well. So starting with something familiar, our first deck is an evolution of the control deck we just covered. This time, more multi-civ cards have made their way into the deck with 2 Tajamal and 1 Aqua Skydiver on top of our 4 Miraculous Snare. I suppose Tajamal is finally being recognized as a check to Bombazar decks. Yes, he gets owned by Windax, but without removal, Bombazar and Twin Cannon can't get over him. Aqua Skydiver is a really cool inclusion too, because when combined with Miraculous Snare, it replaces the old defensive core of Nariel, Palo-Elysis, and Ikaz. You can just keep targeting him with Miraculous Snare, throwing him in shields. When he blocks, you get him back and can play him again. The combo allows you to block 2 attacks, making it very difficult for opponents to close games. Looking at the list, none of these cards actually came out in DM12, but I guess it took people a while to figure this out. Next up, a thin mono light section of 4 Belix and 2 Fal Iga Dawn Guardian. Fal is a favorite in the TCG that came out all the way back in DM2. When summoned, it lets you grab a spell from the grave. The deck has a very potent lineup of spells, and when combining Fal and Belix, you are basically able to grab any spell pretty much whenever you want. Ultra thin mono water section 2, I suppose we can afford for it to be this way since all our multi-civ cards are part water, 1 Aquan, 1 Cyberbrain since both are restricted to 1 at this point, and 2 Thrash Crawler to fish cards out of mana. I suppose they act as extra copies for Belix and can also be used to grab the single Skydiver in case we have to charge it early. As you can see, we've got lots of chargers, so it makes sense for us to have many ways to reuse them. For darkness, we have a pretty standard lineup of 4 Terapit, 4 Slash Charger, 4 Skeleton Vise, 1 Lost Soul, and 2 Hell Slash, also joined by 2 Corpse Chargers. We're well acquainted with most of these by now. They act as our main win condition and have appeared in previous decks in various counts, so this is just the latest iteration. Corpse Charger is a really cool addition to the deck because of how all of the cards interact with each other, and I'll elaborate on this a little more later. Lastly, our fire section features 3 Volcano Charger and 3 Burst Shot. Volcano Charger accelerates mana while acting as early-ish creature kill, and Burst Shot is a shield trigger board clear. It's remarkably good in this deck because all of the deck's creatures are overpowered 2k except Aquan, who we don't really mind blowing up because we can reuse them with Corpse Charger. I'm conflicted on how to feel about this deck because on one hand, I've hated non-attacking strategies in every card game I've played, especially those that involve deck out. I know I like control decks, but if you're winning with Volmedius, at least you're still attacking. On the other hand, I so adore the way the cards interact with each other. It really feels like synergy at its finest. Slash and Volcano Charger are setting you up for success, made better by how often you can reuse them with Belix and Thrash. Grabbing cards out of mana with Belix and Thrash is hardly ever a drawback because of how fast the deck can set up and the fact that recasting a Charger returns it to mana, so you aren't really setting yourself back. Fal and Corpse Charger are useful additions for pushing the game in the direction you want. If any of your trusty spells get discarded, whether by your opponent or by Aquan, Fal can get them back. Corpse Charger can also loop with Belix and Thrash. Corpse a Fallen blocker, summon the blocker, and grab Corpse out of mana. Your opponent discarding Corpse isn't a problem either, since you can always retrieve it with Fal later. I'm sure these are just some of the combos, and if you played with the deck, I'm sure you could discover more. When recreating this deck in the TCG, the swaps are so intuitive you don't even need me to go over them, though I suppose you could replace Aquan with Energy Stream instead of Marinomancer. One thing I'd be keen to do is to overhaul our Fal control deck by taking this engine, but making adjustments so that the win condition would revolve around the finisher of the deck instead of deck out. The other DM12 deck is a funky take on Bombazar. It drops water in favor of creature searching with Rumbling Terrahorn, and also seems to focus on early aggression. It seems as if we don't have to bide our time in anticipation of a big Bombazar turn, we just apply early pressure until we can drop him. The rationale is that the opponent will be so weak by then it shouldn't take an extraordinary amount of effort to finish them off. Starting off, we have 4 Gonta, remarkable stats and kind of hard to get rid of, so he's a natural fit. Again, Windax, this time at 3 copies for the blocker kill. And of course Max Bombazar, who's the big finisher. One card that might need a bit of explanation though is the one-off Miraculous Rebirth. It's a spell that lets you blow up one of your opponent's 5k or under creatures, and then lets you summon a creature from your deck with the same cost as what you just killed. When I first read this card, I felt it was a bit too specific to be consistently useful, but I think I'm coming around. I think it's a reasonable inclusion given the state of the meta, as well as because you have good targets for 2, 3, and 5 cost creatures. Especially for 5. Rebirthing into Ancient Horn can be pretty nuts if you pull off his effect, because across Rebirth, Ancient Horn, and the mana untapping, it's as if you tripled the value of your mana that turn. The fire section, funnily enough, sees a lot of old cards gain some relevance. 3 Rickabu Screwdriver for the blocker hate, as if 3 Windax wasn't enough. 3 Pyrofighter Magnus, another DM6 card making his debut in the series. We want to apply pressure, so Pyro's gonna help us do that. 3 Searing Wave, I guess now that Astral Reef is not around, the 3k and under power threshold is finally relevant, and the 5 mana cost is also very reasonable given how aggressive the deck wants to be. Lastly, 2 Twin Cannon who backs up Bombazar. Saving the best for last, Nature. The deck runs max Bronze Arm and max Soul Swap. 4 Bronze Arm here is a necessity because of how many important 5 mana cards we have. Speaking of which, 4 Rumbling Terrahorn, who's acting as the engine of the deck. Released all the way back in the second set, it's about time he gets some recognition. When summoned, you can grab any creature from your deck, ideally one of your big speed attackers who, on your next turn, can be charged and soul swapped in. Remember, you only need 6 mana to swap in a 7 mana creature due to swap putting something into mana first. Another cool card is Ancient Horn the Watcher. When summoned, if you have 5 shields, untap all your mana. It's like a soft extra turn really. Control decks don't look to break early, and you can Bronze Arm into turn 4 Ancient Horn, so chances are by the time you hit 5 mana, you can probably pull off his effect. His effect is often a nice precursor to the aforementioned Rumbling Terrahorn play, and with a respectable 5k power, he's a great extra body to have on the field. Last up, 3 Terra Dragon Archie de la Serna, who summons himself when discarded during your opponent's turn. Naturally, he's a great answer to Skeleton Vise and Lost Soul. Archie is one of the best anti-control cards in my opinion, and even adds an extra dimension to the game when an opponent is trying to slash you. All in all, a very cool deck, and the Nature Engine is something I'm gonna steal and try to apply to other decks. Also, how fitting is it that the very last deck we're covering spanning the TCG sets can be fully brought over to the TCG. No substitutes or compromises necessary. My only side note is if you don't have Bombazar or don't want to use him, you might be able to try subbing him out with Twin Cannons and Jagalzors. For the last set of decks of the Eternal block, we look to DM13 Eternal Phoenix. It of course contains cards we did not get, but we can see if the decks can still be brought over. The first list is a Warlord Elzonius deck with many familiar cards. We start the deck with max copies of Miraculous Snare, a card I've talked enough about, and 3 copies of an unfamiliar card, Judgment of the Flame, Spear, and Water's Blade. A bit of a mouthful, so I'll just refer to it as Judgment. Keeping true to the multi-civ theme, it draws its effects from established fire and water cards. At the cost of 6 mana, destroy all creatures with power 3k or less, and you may draw a card for each card destroyed. It's a pretty wild effect and one many decks can benefit from, though Control probably salivates over it more than anything else. It's a great card, especially considering we don't have much in the way of drawing cards. The light section is filled with mostly Gladiators, 4 Belix, 3 Belmol, and 2 Warlord Elzonius. We know what Belix does by now, but aside from that, he serves as cheap evo bait. 3 copies of Belmol, who is another form of cheap evo bait. He's a blocker that has to block, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Remembering that Judgment also hits your guys, 3500 power is very convenient. Warlord Elzonius is the finisher of the deck, and I do believe attacking is now the preferred win condition. 5 mana 8k double breaker who cannot be targeted, so shield triggers are useless against him save Holy All. As you can imagine, he's insanely difficult to get rid of, and we would love to build a deck around him at some point. Petrova is the only non-gladiator mono light card we have. It can act as a mini Elzonius, but buffing your own gladiators can be helpful in slowing your opponent down. It also prevents Belix from being destroyed by Judgment. For water, 1 Aquan, 1 Cyberbrain, and 1 Thrash Crawler. Pretty basic. Despite being restricted to 1, Aquan and Cyberbrain are still earning their keep in these kinds of decks, which just goes to show how good they are. For darkness, we have a similar lineup to the DM12 list, 1 Corpse Charger, 4 Slash Charger, 4 Skeleton Vise, 2 Lost Soul, 4 Terrapit, but accompanied by a returning pair of Dark Hydra. When you lose some of your gladiators, especially Belix from Judgment, he's a good way to get them back. The last 2 slots of the deck go to 2 Burst Shot. They've been cut down from 4 from the previous list to favor Judgment. Not sure how I feel about this inclusion because we don't even have a way to get it into shields, but it is what it is. When making a TCG counterpart, my first instinct is to eliminate fire entirely. I dump 2 Judgments for energy streams and the Burst Shots for Holy Alls. Holy All should function similarly to Burst Shot since having a field of blockers should allow you to clear your opponent's board of weenies. The last slot, since the list runs 3 Judgments, could go to the 3rd stream, a 3rd Holy Awe, or something else entirely depending on how testing goes. I also think 4 Miraculous Snare is a bit excessive since deck out isn't your main win condition anymore, but I could be wrong on this. The final list is a Bombazar control deck, or at least a Bombazar deck that has aspects of control. One of my closest friends in high school ran a deck with a similar concept, albeit much less refined, but it's nice to see he was onto something. For multi-civs, 3 Bombazar and 3 Judgment, your finisher and the shiniest new toy. Gallic is a curious choice. Unlike its cousins Estel, Windex, and Skysword, there is no aspect of board building in the ability. It's purely disruptive, and this makes its use highly situational. However, in this particular list, I'd say it works. Multi-civ cards aside, you'll notice that the fire section is absent. No Twin Cannon as your backup attacker, and no rushdown cards. I surmise the strategy of the deck is to build up your board while controlling the opponent until you can pull off a big Bombazar turn where you just overwhelm your opponent with an army of attackers, or even better, combine them with Curse Totem. Gallic fulfills Windax's and Screwdriver's role in the blocker removal department, but plays into the disruptive element by chipping away at your opponent's hand. For draw, 4 Energy Stream and 1 Cyberbrain. This is as consistent as spell-based draw is going to get. The other water slots are filled by 3 Coral and 2 Surfer. I suppose you could go with any split between the two, and I couldn't fault you, but Coral may have been prioritized because bouncing to the top of the deck may have been considered more important than Surfer's shield trigger ability. As per usual, Darkness gives us our control-y cards. Our 3 Skeleton Vise can be curved into after a turn 2 Poisonous Mushroom, which is crazy, and pulling off one of our 2 Lost Soul isn't too hard either considering how much mana acceleration we have. Speaking of mana acceleration, we have the classic 3 Poisonous Mushroom and 4 Bronze Arm Tribe. It's crazy how these cards have managed to stay relevant for so long. 4 Soul Swap because the card is insane, so why not run max copies? Then 2 Rumbling Terrahorn and 1 Ancient Horn. With water, Rumbling Terrahorn is less critical for building card advantage, but he's still useful for retrieving Cursed Totem or Our Dragons. Ancient Horn is just cool. Spending 10 mana for the price of 5 is amazing, and aside from Rumbling Terrahorn, you have a nice selection of mid-game cards to follow his summon like Gallic, Corile, Skeleton Vise, or maybe even a mana ramp into draw play like Bronze Arm into Energy Stream. 2 Cursed Totem are there to seal victory. Yes, Bombazar's effect destroys all power 6k creatures when he hits the field, but ideally you're wanting to summon Bombazar and then soul swap something else for Cursed Totem. I feel like that's the main route to victory, and I tremble just thinking about it. Remember that Cursed Totem doesn't need to be tapped for tricks to be switched off. The last card is a single Terra Dragon Archie de la Serna, who acts as a deterrent to discard, so if you like your hand, you can use Rumbling Terrahorn to fish him out of the deck to discourage your opponent. The free summon effect is especially powerful when you consider Bombazar or Cursed Totem decks, in this case both, like having more bodies on the field. When trying this deck out in the TCG, the big challenge is deciding on what to replace Judgment with. As much as I'd like to go for Searing Wave, it conflicts with Ancient Horn. The only other suitable board clear off the top of my head is Apocalypse Vise, but 7 is a bit steep with just this mana acceleration and no Essence Elf. With Searing Wave off the table, maybe Volcano Charger, Mecha Dragon's Breath, or Blizzard of Spears are worth trying out. The latter two are board clears, but Volcano Charger gets a mention because it curves off Poisonous Mushroom and accelerates mana. Or maybe if Ancient Horn isn't that consistent, we could just swap it out for another Rumbling Terrahorn and bring the Searing Waves in. And that's it. We are finally out of deck profiles, having completed the Classic, Invincible, and Eternal sagas. As you know, the game in the West reached the end of its natural life at this point, and with all the talk of Vortex evolutions coming out in its 4th set, DMP will soon be caught up as well. In the next and final video of the series, I'll share my biggest learnings from going over all these decks. I think there are some really cool and often overlooked strategies that are sure to spice up our future lists. This is one TCG fans in particular might really enjoy, so stay tuned for that. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys later.